You're good.
Welcome, everyone. In this episode of OKSA Connects, our guest is Andru Dallaly, the project manager for homeless youth and runaway services at the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. We will learn about programs, services, and resources available for homeless and runaway youth, and how we can ensure that all youth achieve their right to a safe and stable home. Before we jump into the topic, some disclaimers are OKSA is funded by Oklahoma Human Services Child Welfare Division, coordinated by the University of Oklahoma Outreach, National Resource Center for Youth Services. The opinions, beliefs, and viewpoints expressed by guests belong solely to them and do not necessarily reflect the opinions, viewpoints, or official policy of the National Resource Center for Youth Services or Oklahoma Human Services. So our topic today is youth runaway and homelessness. Before we jump into the topic, I would like to give some statistics and background about the topic. Each year, an estimated 4.2 million youth and adults experience homelessness, of which 700,000 are unaccompanied minors, meaning they are not part of a family or accompanied by a parent or guardian. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act defines youth homelessness as young people who cannot live in a safe environment with a relative and who have no other safe living arrangements. On any given night, approximately 41,000 unaccompanied youth ages 13 to 25 experience homelessness. Causes of running away and homelessness among young people are many and varied, as are potential consequences for them. Here are some of the facts and figures related to runaway and homeless youth in the US. 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 25, and at least 1 in 30 adolescents ages 13 to 17 experience some sort of homelessness unaccompanied by a parent or guardian over the course of a year. 69% of homeless youth report mental health problems. 33% of homeless youth had once been part of the foster care system. 27% of LGBTQ youth who were homeless reported exchanging sex for basic needs, compared to 9% of non-LGBTQ youth who reported having to exchange sex for basic needs. 62% of youth report being physically harmed while experiencing homelessness, while 47% of non-LGBTQ youth reported being physically harmed while homeless. The lack of high school diploma or general equivalency diploma such as GED is the #1 correlation for elevated risks of youth homelessness. So as we can see, it's a very prominent issue in the US, and we're very grateful to have Andru here to discuss this with us. Before we start the discussion, I would like to introduce our guest. Andru Dallaly serves as a project manager for homeless youth and runaway services at the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. He has received 2 master's degrees from Southwestern Oklahoma State University in psychoeducational testing and school counseling with an emphasis on psychotherapy. He was part of the team of community members responsible for Oklahoma City's first low-barrier youth shelters. He also serves as the lead advisor of the Oklahoma City Homeless Youth Action Board and vice chair of the Homeless Youth Alliance Coalition. Mr. Dallaly has over 11 years of experience working to fill the gaps between homeless youth serving and mental health systems to ensure that all youth achieve their right to be safe, to have a safe and stable home. Welcome, Mr. Dallaly. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of OKSA Connects. We're very grateful to have you and looking forward to our discussions.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So based on these statistics, youth homelessness in the US is more common than you might think. The general conception is that youth homelessness is young people living on the streets. What are some other situations that come under youth homelessness umbrella? For instance, is young people who are couch surfing or living in shelters, is that also considered homelessness?
Well, that's a very complex question, and the short answer is yes, but it definitely depends on who is funding the program and who is funding the service. Different funding sources operate off of different definitions of homelessness. I would love for there to just be a universally accepted definition, but I know, for example, HUD has a lot more, the Housing and Urban Development, they have a lot more strict guidelines of what they consider homeless. For example, if you are couch surfing, which is basically you're staying in a, not necessarily literally sleeping on a couch, but staying on a spare space in someone else's home for a short period of time. That's considered, couch surfing, hopping from friend to friend, or even relative to relative. That's still couch surfing, even though they are related to you or they're in close proximity to you. You still don't have a home of your own, and so HUD would not consider that homeless. But when you move over to the education system and the school systems, they do consider that homeless, and so you'd qualify for assistance through them, but not necessarily through HUD-funded programs. And so, again, it just kind of depends on who's funding it. For me, myself, I kind of operate off of a broad definition of if you lack a stable and safe place of your own that you can call your own, and there's no predetermined timeline of when you need to be out of that space, that's being housed, that's having a home. So anything that deviates from that is a form of homelessness, and the young person experiences that as a traumatic event of being unhoused. But there's lots of different ways. There's definitely couch surfing. There's being doubled up, which is when you're actually sharing a household with someone else in their own home, and so you're paying. Oftentimes, what happens is you're bargaining your food stamps, paying a small or even too high of rent just to share a little space of the home. So you still have your own room, but that house, you can still get kicked out of that house at any time. We have a lot of families, when we talk about family homelessness, that include children and youth, and we see a lot of that as well.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing, it depends on who you ask or what program it is, but
by and large, yes. But
the statistics are still very high. What are some of the factors that increases a young person's odds of running away or homelessness? And what are those odds specific to children and youth in foster care?
So speaking in terms of youth, not necessarily, really when you analyze the factors, when you talk with the youth in the shelters, like I often do, I kind of do my own little unofficial survey of, what brought you here. It's kind of the common grounds are conflict at home, conflict with caregivers, and those conflicts, when you dig deeper into that, can be for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes there's mental illness either on the part of the youth or the caregiver, and that kind of causes a disconnect in the household, a discomfort where both parties just aren't able to safely cohabitate together, or both even. Oftentimes we see the statistics that if you are identifying as gay, lesbian, trans, of that spectrum, you are more likely to become homeless because those family members, disown, kick out, kick them out of the streets and things like that. So there's a lot of, so that kind of, for example, any given day at the shelters, half of the population that's staying there are people who are identifying as LGBT. And it's usually because of, family not really being affirming, family not being very accepting of that part of their lives. And so that particularly puts a young person at risk. Same in foster care. Foster parents might, be very well mannered and very well intentioned, but then when they find out their foster kid is gay or trans, they kind of shift gears and still kind of revert to that. Well, this doesn't fit with my viewpoint of life and my spiritual wellness, so you can no longer be here, type of thing. And we see a lot of failed adoptions for that reason as well, and they end up homeless because of that. But at the root of it all, it's conflict between that young person and that caregiver, and it's not to say one is more at fault than the other. It's kind of a one side or both sides of the party kind of lack the skills needed to kind of resolve the conflict safely on their own, and so that causes the young person to view homelessness or running away as the safer alternative than staying home.
So yeah, I think that kind of speaks to like how like biological reasons. So human development also plays a role in it. So like rational decision making, inhibition, planning, and reasoning or frontal lobe is still developing with young people, and it's not as it would be for an adult that who's fully developed biologically. So in a way, they're biologically they're more likely to engage in high risk behavior or unsafe sexual activities or substance use than mature adults. So
Right.
like without
and to them,
yeah.
Okay. And to them, that is leaving home, if home is not affirming, if home is not meshing well with their psyche, if they're not getting along with their parents or their caregivers, to them, leaving home is the safe option, is the safe choice. It's riskier to stay home than it is to go out and try it on their own. Again, not placing blame on either side of the coin. I try really hard to balance that out. Oftentimes parents themselves, they grew up in homes where they themselves didn't get all their needs met and all their critical thinking and resolution skills built when they were developing. And so they lack the skills that they need to parent, for lack of a better term, in a way that will keep their kids feeling safe at home. And so it's kind of a two-pronged approach. You would need to address the family, but also the youth. It wouldn't necessarily, a lot of people like to think of it as the youth's fault. I've been guilty of maybe thinking it's the parents' fault, but it isn't. The truth is that it's kind of somewhere in between. And you have to serve the whole family unit, really.
It's more complex.
Yes.
Yeah. So as we know that youth and children are a very vulnerable population because of biological reason, developmental, and all sorts of different reasons. What are some of the consequences faced by youth due to homelessness?
Well, big picture, the first and foremost, the big picture consequence is that if they are not provided the services and interventions they need, they become homeless adults. And then they just add to the homeless adult population and all the issues involved with that. But when we dig deeper into it, homeless youth are more likely to get involved in substance use. Maybe they weren't involved in substance use before they became homeless, but now that they're around others who have turned to that as maybe a coping skill or a way to make money, they're kind of exposed to that. And so a lot of them end up inevitably getting involved in it and then becoming addicted. Their mental illnesses will obviously go unchecked because they're not taking care of themselves. And so even if they maybe had mental health issues before they became homeless, those symptoms become exacerbated. Those natural consequences of being mentally ill become exacerbated. And so they're probably getting hospitalized more often, maybe getting in run-ins with the law. In Oklahoma and other states across the country and pretty much around the world, homeless youth are also very vulnerable to becoming trafficked or engaging in or getting invited to engage in survival sex or commercial sex work. And so then they go into all of the natural consequences of being in that world. And so, so basically it's kind of cyclical. It all kind of it's just bad. It's not good. No young person deserves to have to be in that situation at all. But again, my big takeaway is that if we don't help with them, they are definitely more likely to become homeless adults. Right. And it becomes a little harder to help them at that point.
Right. I was also reading that according to National Sexual Violence Resource Center, 1 in 3 teens on the streets will be lured into prostitution within 48 hours of leaving home. And they're also much more likely to commit suicide. It's something like twice as likely that compared to youth or peers who are not homeless. So the chances of them getting into a difficult situation are much higher than other the youth who are not homeless. And also it kind of disrupts their education, I imagine, because of the nature of being homeless, they will not be able to attend school or continue with school.
Definitely, there's definitely an air of maybe there's no point to going to school, or even if there is a point to going to school, they don't know where they can go. They don't know that they qualify as homeless youth for extra services and supports for school. And so they kind of let that go. That's not a priority to them. Their survival becomes their priority. They're in survival mode. So education is a luxury to them in that mindset, especially if they're street dependent youth or shelter youth. They don't have the time to breathe and relax and think of that as a real goal for themselves, as something they can really attain.
Yeah.
So it's not. And then we see a lot of times on the other end of that spectrum that the homeless youth might cling to their school a little too tightly because that is the only place that they can have a roof over their head for a few more hours of the day and food fed. And so it kind of runs the gamut. But by and large, we see a lot of youth who we have to get them to a point of security and feeling what their version of safe is before we can start talking to them about school and employment and other things like that. And so we kind of, whether that be housing or long-term shelter, that's kind of what we find that we have to do first for them. It's not just if you go to school, then we'll help you here. It's let's help you here and then we'll get you into school.
So meet the basic needs and then think about
yes.
school.
Yes. Yeah. I had a thought about it and I just now, it left me, sorry. Trying. Yeah, it's left me now.
Yeah. So what sort of help and resources are available for runaway and homeless youth and even their families or caregivers or the community that they are in and they're worried about them? Are there any services that for those two groups, for youth and the families and caregivers?
So, and yes, there is, and it's just, it kind of depends on where you're at as to how they are accessed. I know in Oklahoma City and then other select communities in Oklahoma, we have what's called a Basic Center Grant. So that's a federally funded grant specifically for homeless minors who are not able to stay at home and who are not able to go into DHS custody. Part of that grant is to provide the shelter and support to the minor, to the unaccompanied minor, but then also to engage the family in whatever services they need to be able to safely allow that child to come back in the home. And so Oklahoma City has that right now until next year. And then I believe, I don't want to say it wrong. I know usually youth service organizations across the state apply for these grants. And so I don't want to say what's wrong. I think El Reno has one right now. And each grantee operates a little differently. For me, a good emphasis on our program is on family engagement. So we have family support providers who will try to work with the families a little more often. So it's not just, you drop the kid off at the shelter and then you work with the kid on getting whatever they need to do whatever. We also try to work with the family to see what we can do to reunify them, because we know that a shelter is not a safe place for a young person. And that was kind of my thought in the previous question. Adult shelters, family shelters, up until those are not always, we think of those as the common option for homeless youth and young adults anyway, because up until maybe about 5 years ago, we didn't have young adult shelters in Oklahoma. If you were under 18, then you hoped to get into the minor shelter, but because you weren't in DHS custody, a lot of the minor shelters wouldn't keep you very long, because you weren't attached to those dollars necessarily. And then if you were 18 or over, you would go into the adult shelters. But the adult shelters are filled with people who have been homeless for years and been around the block a few times, and they are the ones that can victimize the young people anyway. And so the young people would choose to go on the streets rather than be in the adult shelters. And so just until recently, in the last 5 years, has there been an interest and push in getting shelter spaces for young adults to kind of circumvent those consequences we were talking about in the previous question.
Yeah.
And so I encourage any other community in Oklahoma to do the same, because Oklahoma City, I think, is the only one. We now have 2, which is great. We have 2 low barrier shelters in Oklahoma City for young adults. but that's still not enough. Both are always full and both are always on wait lists. And so definitely could use more.
Yeah, definitely. So it sounds like there are some on the ground programs serving homeless youth. What are some of the like federal and state legislative response to this major issue of youth homelessness? Is there any?
Yes, yeah, I know federally we're doing what they're doing the best they can. Again, the Administration of Children and Families, they issue the RHY grants every year. And so those are federally funded programs specifically from the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act to kind of address homeless youth in different facets. And so they have the Basic Center grant, which is for minors, the Transitional Living, which is for young adults, and then street outreach. They also have a grant for young homeless parents as well. And so it just depends on if an Oklahoma provider is lucky enough to get awarded those grants as to whether or not that funding comes to Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma City itself was recently, about 2 weeks ago, awarded a $2 million grant for homeless youth projects. And so that's going to be great. But state legislation kind of teeters on being, it's doing the best they can. I know in May, Governor Stitt signed something into law that will allow homeless minors who are 16 or 17 to be able to sign their own housing contracts or sign their own leases without their parents. And so that should go into effect in November. And so that's going to be a big help because we have a lot of our minors in our shelters right now who do have the ability and skills and maturity to live on their own. And we would like to give them a different pathway rather than sentencing them to 3 or 4 years into a shelter. So that's going to be great. Other than that, there's not anything that comes to mind specifically.
Mm-hmm. So like a strong foundation of data and statistics is necessary to inform developing and implementing effective federal, state, and local policies and strategies to reduce the number of young people lacking a safe and stable housing. Do you know of any actions that are being taken to capture this population? Because the numbers shows that it's a big problem, but there's not enough data to help with the program or for a solution. Do you know of any programs for that?
So we don't necessarily at this point, maybe because of the $2 million grant we got in Oklahoma City, there might be some actual research and really official data collection being collected soon. But up until that point, we do what we call the point in time count, which is a yearly event that HUD requires where we survey the entire homeless population of a community for their HUD funding. And so that in itself captures some youth, but it happens if you're not familiar with it, it typically happens in the middle of the night between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. And a lot of our young people are able to really hide a lot better than their homeless adult counterparts. And so we have a lot more trouble finding them. And so as of 2 years ago, our team, we host a youth point in time event, which usually happens around that same time, but it's during the day. It's kind of masked, if for lack of a better term, as a social recreational event and resource fair where youth can come and get what they need and we can survey them there. And that has helped us count a little more accurately, but it's still not perfect. And so we hope that the funding coming in will help us enhance those efforts. And I know that Tulsa also has a youth version of their point in time count that they do in some capacity as well.
So I'm just curious, like the reason for young people being successful in hiding and not being able to capture it, is that because of fear of going back to the system, or what are the reasons for that?
For the youth that are from the system, that is definitely a factor. Not all of the homeless youth are from DHS or from OJA. There's some that are just kicked out of their homes or just left their homes. But so that is definitely a thing. And also when you talk about homelessness, a lot of young people don't really view themselves as homeless, even though they're sleeping under a bridge. They think of that as a temporary solution to a problem that was going on in their life beforehand, a lot of times. And so they're not gonna, and again, the point in time count happens in January in the winter. So they're they're not going to want to stay outside in the winter. They're going to find a temporary place during that time anyway. And then there are the youth that do actively hide because they don't want to be found because they worry that their abusers or their parents or their DHS workers will find them. Lots of different reasons why they hide. Lack of trust in the services because the systems have let them down prior to that. Different things.
Mm-hmm. So like youth homelessness and runaway is something that affects adults, but mainly young people. How are the voices of young people with lived experiences are heard and incorporated in these initiatives and programs, or just designing a program? Are there any initiatives to make sure that the voices of youth with lived experiences being heard and incorporated?
So on the official level, I know that I myself, I advise the Oklahoma City Youth Action Board. That is a board of youth comprised of youth with lived experience and homelessness or housing instability. And so they are able to be a part of the $2 million grant, for example. They will be actually deciding voting members of who gets that funding, and what projects are selected to be implemented. They are invited to the table of a lot of our meetings, and they get, for example, when the second youth shelter was opening, the team responsible for that invited the Youth Action Board to kind of tell them, how should we decorate? What's the best ways what are the best rules? What are the best policies in place to keep youth? Where can we find youth? When we find them, what are the best ways to get them the help they need? And so they're able to kind of help develop programs from the ground up with providers. I know Tulsa has their version of a Youth Action Board as well. And so that's really great. I do a lot of technical assistance to homeless providers and youth providers across the state, and I always encourage them to have youth at the table, kind of a nothing about them without them philosophy. I know there are some youth that are invited to be on the board of directors in some nonprofits now with lived experience. And so, for example, CC Youth Services and I think Pivot as well, I think they have youth with lived experience on their board of directors now. And so that helps bring that voice to the table and elevates that voice. So nothing is being decided as far as programming, as far as policies and procedures, disciplinary protocols. All of that is co-decided by a young person who has gone through it before.
That's really great. That's very good to hear. Just for our audience, if you have any questions, you can drop it in the chat or in the comment section of our Facebook Live. While we wait, if there are any questions, Andrew, do you have, could you share your information if someone wants to reach out to you or?
Yeah, do I share in the chat or do I verbalize it?
If you verbalize it, James will add it to the chat.
Okay, and so any kind of inquiries related to youth and young adult homelessness, you can send to my email. It is listen.dallally@odmhsas.org. I know that's a lot of letters, so I'm gonna put it in the Zoom chat and let that translate to the Facebook if need be. But I can talk youth homelessness solutions all day, every day. So email me, all of that.
Thank you. So if there are any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or drop your question in the chat. So it seems like there are no questions right now on Facebook or here, but feel free to reach out to Andrew if there are anything. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your very valuable insight on this issue. We really appreciated it, and hopefully it will help a lot of people along the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.